r/NoSleep. You're going to hear a voice in your house, you must never answer. It started with whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs drifting through the rooms of our house. My dad called me into the living room one evening, and I could see the seriousness in his face. He sat me down, looked me square in the eyes, and said, "Son, you're going to hear something in this house. It might call your name, sound familiar, even mimic us. But whatever you hear, you must never, ever answer." I stared at him, bewildered. My father was the most pragmatic man I knew, not prone to superstition. The very idea that something supernatural might lurk in our home felt like a strange, bad joke. But his expression held no trace of humor. "You need to listen to me," he continued, lowering his voice. "This voice, it only has power if you acknowledge it. As long as we ignore it, it can't touch us. But if you answer, if you engage, it will become a part of you. Promise me, you will never respond." I nodded, unsure of what else to do. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence of our house felt heavier than usual. Every creak of the wood, every groan of the pipes seemed amplified, eerie. Then, I heard it, a soft, gentle whisper coming from down the hall. At first, it was just a faint sound, like a breeze through an open window. I closed my eyes tightly, willing it to go away. But it got louder. "Johnny," it called, the voice familiar yet distorted, like my mom's, but not quite right. It felt like a recording of her voice slowed down, stretched thin. "Johnny, come here." I felt a cold sweat break out over me as I gripped my sheets, too terrified to move. My father's warning echoed in my head. "Do not answer." For what felt like hours, I lay there, the voice drifting through the darkness. Sometimes it would call my name softly, other times it would whimper, as if in pain. But no matter how much it begged, I kept my silence. Days passed, and the voice became a presence in our home. We could all hear it, and each time it would take on a slightly different tone, mimicking each one of us. It would call to my sister, imitating my father's voice, or try to coax my mother with a familiar phrase, something only she would recognize. It was relentless. Yet, as long as we ignored it, it remained a whisper in the background, just an echo. One night, however, my sister couldn't take it anymore. She was just a kid, and the constant whispers had worn her down. Late one evening, I heard her shout, "What do you want?" The silence that followed was chilling. I crept out of my room and saw my father standing in the hallway, his face pale as he stared at my sister's door. He didn't say anything, just shook his head, his face a mix of anger and fear. The next day, my sister was different. She barely spoke, her eyes dull and glazed, as if something inside her had been dimmed. My mother and father tried to help her, but she withdrew further, almost as if she were fading before our eyes. And that's when the whispers changed. They were no longer random, they were directed, always coming from just behind her, or from the shadows in her room. Sometimes, I would see her muttering under her breath, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. A week after she'd spoken to the voice, she was gone. I woke up one morning, and her bed was empty, her room colder than the rest of the house. My parents searched everywhere, called the police, but there was no trace of her. And the whispering? It continued, now laced with laughter, mocking us. Months passed, and my mother started to unravel. The guilt of my sister's disappearance weighed heavily on her, and the whispers didn't let up. They mocked her, imitated my sister's voice, called to her in the dead of night. One evening, I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her face as she muttered back to the voice. She was asking it questions, pleading with it, demanding to know where her daughter was. That night, my mother vanished too. After my mother's disappearance, the whispers grew louder, more aggressive. They no longer confined themselves to the night but echoed through the house at all hours. They taunted my father and me, twisting their voices into warped versions of my mother and sister. Sometimes they would laugh, a sick, hollow sound that would leave us both trembling. One evening, as my father and I sat in silence, the whispers began again. But this time, they were different, mocking, malicious. "Dad, it's me, Johnny," the voice purred, twisting my own words, echoing things I'd said over the years. My father's face turned ashen, and I could see the torment in his eyes. "Don't listen to it," I whispered, but I could see his resolve wavering. Over time, the voice grew louder, more insistent. And then, one day, it stopped. The house fell silent. For the first time in years, we felt a sense of peace, a quiet we had almost forgotten. But I knew better than to let my guard down. I had seen too much, lost too much. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft knock at my door. "Johnny," the voice said, and I froze, recognizing it immediately. It was my father's voice. But I knew it wasn't him. He'd vanished the previous night, slipping away silently like my mother and sister before him. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to go away. "Johnny, please," it whispered, pleading, sounding so much like my father that my heart broke. "Help me." The voice cracked, filling with desperation. "Please, son." But I didn't answer. I couldn't. And as I lay there, the whispers continued, softer now, fading in and out of the walls. Days turned into weeks, then months, and the whispers became a constant background noise, a reminder of everyone I had lost. Sometimes, in my weakest moments, I found myself wanting to respond, to ask it why it had taken everything from me. But I never did. And now, here I am, telling you my story, asking you to listen. Not because I want your pity, but because I can't take it anymore. I can't bear the weight of these whispers. So, I need you to think about them. Think about the voice that will call to you, pleading, mimicking those you love. And when it does, you must not answer. No matter how familiar, no matter how comforting it may sound, do not respond. Because once you answer, it's over. And you'll never know peace again. Because once you answer, it's over. And you'll never know peace again. The whispers grew sharper, more persistent, each day gnawing away at my will. It's a dreadful thing to feel alone, but to feel alone while being haunted by voices that mimic those you love. It's a torment beyond measure. Weeks turned into months, and as the seasons changed, the whispers evolved too. What had once been faint calls and eerie laughs became something more sinister, almost intelligent. One night, as I was sitting alone in the living room, the lights flickered, and the air grew cold, thick with a dread I couldn't shake. The house felt alive, watching, waiting. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard it again, a soft, guttural whisper, unmistakable and vile. "Johnny." I turned, knowing I shouldn't, but the voice had changed. It was my mother's voice, but it sounded raw, as though it was being torn from her throat. "Help me, Johnny. Please." The desperation in her voice was unbearable, cutting through my resolve like a knife. But I stayed silent. I clenched my fists and closed my eyes, fighting every urge to scream back, to demand that it give them back to me. Yet as I resisted, the voice became more anguished. It sobbed, begged, pleading for forgiveness, each word tearing into me, making it harder and harder to resist. The thing knew exactly how to weaken me, how to turn my love for my family into a weapon against me. I began to avoid the house, staying out as long as I could each day. But at night, I had no choice but to return, and each time I crossed the threshold, I could feel the darkness pressing in, as if the walls themselves were watching. The whispers followed me, no longer content to wait until nightfall. They crept into my every waking hour, taunting me with fragments of conversations, distorted laughter, or frantic, panicked screams. One evening, I took refuge in my father's study, a room I hadn't dared enter since he vanished. Dust lay thick over his books and papers, and the stale air held a hint of his cologne, faint but familiar. As I sat at his desk, I noticed a leather-bound notebook tucked behind his files. It was old, frayed at the edges, with my father's handwriting scrawled across its cover. It read, "Rules of the House." My hands trembled as I opened it, each page revealing fragments of his observations, warnings, and notes on the strange occurrences in our home. He had written meticulously, detailing every instance he had heard the voice, every tactic it had used to draw him in. He described moments when he had almost faltered, when he had nearly responded, only to pull himself back at the last moment. Then, one entry, written in shaky handwriting, caught my eye. "It's stronger now. I don't know how much longer I can resist. It sounds so much like her. Like our sweet daughter. I know it's a trick, a cruel game, but I don't know how much longer I can endure this alone. If I disappear, if you ever read this, know that I am sorry. Son, if you're reading this, you must leave. Leave and never come back." A chill ran down my spine, but the last few words were scratched out as if he thought better of it. And below them, in a hurried scrawl, he had written, "If you can't leave, you must find the source. Only then will this nightmare end." I spent the next several nights combing through the house, looking for something, anything, that could explain the madness that had overtaken our lives. I checked the attic, the basement, every closet and crawl space, but there was nothing. Just the same cold, oppressive silence, punctuated only by the occasional whisper that seemed to mock my efforts. One stormy night, As the rain lashed against the windows and lightning flashed outside, I heard a noise coming from beneath the floorboards in the living room. It was faint, like something scratching or clawing to get out. I pried up the floorboards and found a small, hollowed-out space beneath, hidden from view. Inside lay an old, dust-covered mirror, its glass dark and murky, as though it had been scorched. As I reached out to touch it, a wave of nausea washed over me, and the whispering began again, louder this time, filling the room. "Johnny! Come closer," it hissed, the voice warping, twisting into something inhuman. My reflection in the mirror began to distort, my face twisting into grotesque shapes, eyes hollow and dark. Suddenly, I saw them, my mother, my sister, my father, reflected behind me, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, hands pressed against the glass as if trapped inside. They mouthed silent pleas, their eyes wide with desperation. I stumbled back, horrified, but as I did, I felt something grip my shoulder, cold and unnatural. "Stay with us, Johnny," the voice whispered, its tone both mocking and inviting. "Join us." I jerked away, my heart pounding, but the urge to look back, to reach out to them, was overwhelming. I knew, deep down, that if I touched that mirror, if I even acknowledged what I'd seen, I'd be lost, pulled into whatever realm of torment had claimed my family. In the days that followed, the whispers took on a life of their own, no longer confined to my family's voices but morphing into unrecognizable, nightmarish forms. Sometimes they screamed, their voices filled with rage and malice, other times, they whispered sweet promises, enticing me with the thought of reunion. I grew thin and hollow-eyed, sleep a distant memory. My friends and coworkers noticed my decline, but what could I tell them? That my house was haunted by voices that sought to claim my soul? They'd never believe me. They'd never understand. Finally, one night, driven to the edge of my sanity, I returned to the mirror. This time, I came prepared. I brought a hammer, my heart pounding as I approached, ready to shatter it into pieces. But as I raised the hammer, the whispers grew frantic, desperate, pleading with me to stop. "Please, Johnny, don't. We're trapped. You'll doom us all," they wailed. I hesitated, my grip faltering. The voice sounded so real, so much like my father. But then I remembered his warning, his final plea for me to leave. Whatever was in that mirror, whatever was pretending to be my family, it was a lie, a parasite feeding on my grief, my love for them. With a scream, I brought the hammer down, shattering the glass. The house shook, the lights flickered, and a bone-chilling wail filled the air, a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. And then, silence. I stood there, breathless, surrounded by shards of broken glass. The room felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The whispering was gone, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. But peace did not last. In the weeks that followed, strange things continued to happen. Shadows shifted in the corners of my vision, and at night, I'd hear faint murmurs, as if something was trying to return, clawing its way back from the darkness. The house still felt alive, as if the echoes of that curse lingered in the walls, waiting. And then, one night, I woke to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was my sister, or something that looked like her face pale and gaunt, eyes wide with an unnatural light. "Johnny," she whispered, her voice soft, pleading. "Why did you leave us?" I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure faded into the darkness, leaving only the faintest whisper in its wake. "You'll never be free, Johnny. We're part of you now. Forever." And now, every night, I hear them again, their voices soft and gentle, laced with sorrow and anger. They call to me, whispering promises, threats, confessions of love and hate. I don't know if I can resist them forever. Maybe I don't want to. But if you're hearing this, if my words reach you, please remember my story. Remember the voices and the trap they set. Because once you answer, they'll never let you go. And one day, when your resolve is worn, when your will is exhausted, you might find yourself answering back. And when you do, you'll find that the whispers are already inside you.